children provide for us an interesting perspective on many things, including dating and marriage. When Lynette, who was age 8, was asked, what do most people do on a date? She offered this interesting perspective on men and women. She said, dates are for having fun, and people should use them to get to know each other. She said, even boys have something to say if you listen long enough. In response to the question, how do you decide who to marry? Kristen, age 10, suggested, no one really decides before they grow up who they're going to marry. God decides it all the way before, and you get to find out later who you're stuck with. Derek is a very observant child. In response to the question, how can a stranger tell if two people are married? He suggested, you might have to guess based on whether they seem to be yelling at the same kids. And Lori, age 8, who I guess might be a bit of a handful, in response to the question, what do you think your mom and dad have in common? Said, both don't want any more kids. But the question I'd like to focus on for just a moment is back to the question, what do most people do on a date? Martin, age 10, suggested this. On the first date, they just tell each other lies, and that usually gets them interested enough to go for a second date. Of course, at the beginning of a relationship, we tend to put our best foot forward. We want the other person to especially see those qualities about ourselves that we think they might find attractive and admirable. How stunning, then, that the scriptures include the gospel story we just heard. Talk about not putting your best foot forward. The disciples who had heard Jesus announce that he would be raised from the dead, and then heard that he had been raised from the dead, were found a week later, what? Locked behind closed doors. When they meet Jesus and they try to announce the good news to Thomas, Thomas says, I just can't believe it. The church doesn't try to make it look pretty today. And I think that is crucial. Because there is something of God that we will never know when we bring forward simply our strengths. There's something of God that we will never know unless we bring forward our woundedness, our fear, our doubt, our weakness, those things that we might consider the least attractive. Notice what it was that helped Thomas eventually believe. It was when he touched the wounds of Christ. Even in his resurrected body, Christ still carried the wounds. And my brothers and sisters, unless we are willing to let other people touch our wounds, unless we are willing to touch the wounds and brokenness and weakness in each other, there is something of God, of life, of love that we will never know. I ask the question to begin, are you weak enough to be a Christian? We tend to think the question is more, am I strong enough? Do I have the virtues I need to live this holy and noble calling? And those are valid things to aspire to. But unless we are able to embrace our weakness and bring ourselves honestly as we are, there is very little room in the end for us to meet God. And if we think we're supposed to have it all together, when we find out the truth of all of us that we don't, we might be tempted to do what Thomas did, and that's to hide ourselves away from the community. We're just ashamed, or we don't want people to know. And I don't know what was going on in Thomas, why he wasn't with the others. I could imagine him sitting on the floor somewhere weeping and punching the wall. He just can't stand his pain at the death of Jesus. Or maybe he had heard accounts too that he had been raised from the dead, but he couldn't believe it. He was so ashamed. But I don't know what was going on inside of him, but he was graced enough to know that he needed to go back to the community. And it was there then when he came back that he was able to touch the wounds of Christ and to believe. And my brothers and sisters, it has to be like that here. This has to be a place where you know you can bring yourself as you are. Bring the weakness, bring the doubt, bring the struggle. I never say a Sunday Mass without at some point looking out and seeing some people crying. And you know what? I'm glad. I'm glad that when your hearts are broken, you know to bring them here. Not to stay away from the community and try to deal with it elsewhere, because I really believe that it is when we bring ourselves in our honesty and in our pain and in our weakness that then we are maybe open to touch the wounds of Christ as well and to meet him as he touches our wounds. Some call this the Sunday after Easter Divine Mercy Sunday. Well, you know what? There is a merciful God to meet here. This meal is not for people who have it all together. This meal is for sinners. This meal is not the reward of the righteous. Jesus never understood it like that. Jesus was always eating with sinners, and he wants to do that again. This meal is for people who know we don't have it together. This meal is for people who know we are weak and sinful. This meal is for people who know that we need some help, and we want to bring ourselves as we are to help get the healing and strength and hope we need for the journey. My brothers and sisters, please. I think we are called to the honesty of, yes, here's the gifts we have. Yes, here's the strengths we have. But yes, here's the wounds I have. Here's the loneliness, the fear, the heartache, the sin, the struggle, the depression. Bring it all here that we might meet the living God. Some years ago, a surgeon told me about what it was like to be in the room of a young woman on whose face he had done some surgery, and it didn't go so well. There was no way, as skilled as he was, to take the tumor out of her cheek without severing the little nerve that connected to part of her mouth. And he was standing next to her bed, he said, and she had the twisted smile because the one side of her mouth would no longer be able to move. He said the young woman's husband was on the opposite side of the bed, just loving her tenderly and fiercely. He said the young woman looked up at him and said, "Will my mouth always be like this?" He said, "It will, because the nerve was cut." She nodded and was quiet. But the young man smiled. "I like it," he said. "It's kind of cute." And the surgeon said that then, unmindful of his presence, he saw the young man bend to kiss her crooked mouth. And he said, I was so close that I could see how he twisted his own lips to accommodate to hers, to show her that their kiss still works. That is the kind of God we have, who would meet us in our brokenness, meet us in our woundedness, meet us in our weakness to give us life. Well, hello, buddy. How are you? How are you, Big Al? I'm fine. You're fine? Well, Big Al, you don't look so fine. I'm fine. Oh. Well, your words say you're fine, but your body says you're not so okay. Fine. I'm strong. Well, Big Al, I know sometimes people feel like they're supposed to be strong all the time, but I don't think that that's what Jesus said. And you know, it's okay sometimes to be scared or lonely or sad. You don't have to try to be tough. And if you'd like to talk about it, well, maybe we'll talk later, huh? Yeah. Big Al, I'm glad that you don't think you have to be tough all the time. I'm sad. You're sad? Okay. It's okay to be sad. We can talk about that later. No, I won't tell anybody. No. Sometimes it's important to have somebody where you can trust them, that you can say what's inside of your heart. But we'll talk more later, okay? Boys and girls, sometimes people will tell you you should be strong. But we want you to know you don't have to be strong all the time. It's okay to be sad or scared or lonely. And when you feel that, you can tell somebody you trust, and you can certainly tell Jesus, because he understands.